Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Sam Magavern from the Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, which unites over 275 community organizations working to build a better Buffalo. Delighted to join you every Tuesday at 1 p.m. on Facebook Live, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 AM. Today we'll be joined by three members of the Buffalo Police Advisory Board, which was created this year by the Common Council, including Aaron Carmen, who's an instructor at Damon College's Department of Social Work, Danielle Johnson from Open Buffalo's Justice and Opportunity Table, and Stephen Sanyu from Burmese Community Services. We'll be talking about the residents' top concerns about policing that they've heard at 3 recent community forums and about next steps in improving policing in Buffalo. Don't forget to follow PPG on Facebook and Twitter, and of course you can always get great information on our website, ppgbuffalo.org. The Public Good is sponsored in part by Univera Healthcare, real people who really care. You can get videos from The Public Good, including our 3-minute 3-question videos on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. A few quick announcements for you before we get started with our guests. Tomorrow on October 3rd, there will be a listening session about the legalization and regulation of marijuana. The goal of these sessions is to get input from community members on the implementation of legalization and regulation of marijuana. This event will be at 4600 Genesee Street in Cheektowaga, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Doors open at 5:30 p.m. and you can find that event on the web to register. It's tomorrow, October 3rd, a marijuana listening session in Cheektowaga. On Thursday, October 4th, there will be another screening of The Blackness Project, a film that provides a moving foundation for honest and open conversations about race. There will be a panel discussion moderated by Mayor Byron Brown. I'll be on the panel myself, as a matter of fact. That is Thursday, October 4th, 6 p.m. The Blackness Project, that is at the Birchfield Penny Arts Center, and you can see their Facebook event page for more information on that. Lastly, this Saturday, October 6th, an amazing event coming your way. It's Climbing Poetry, back for the 3rd year running. It's a free performance of an amazing spoken word duo with infectious beats and multimedia theater. Alexa Garcia and Naima Penniman form the award-winning duo, exploring diverse themes as activists and artists that infuse our movements for justice with healing and imagination. Climbing Poetry this Saturday, October 6th. It's at the Matt Urban Center, 1081 Broadway in Buffalo. Check out Climbing Poetry Live in Buffalo Facebook event page for more information about that. All right, with that, I want to welcome our 3 guests from the Buffalo Police Advisory Board, Stephen Sanyu, Danny Johnson, and Aaron Carmen. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Pleasure.
So if one of you wants to start by just explaining a little bit about what is the Buffalo Police Advisory Board and how and why it got started, that would be great.
Sure. So once again, thank you for inviting us to be here. We're excited to be here and be able to speak with you. So the Police Advisory Board is we are an 11-member board, and we kind of have a 3-purpose type of a mission. The first is to advocate for the community. The second is to, especially around issues of policing in the city of Buffalo, the second is to represent and authentically represent the voices of the community. Because we feel as though to be able to represent the community, we have to authentically hear from them. And in order to do that, we have the chance to engage with them in a series of 3 forums, which we'll describe in a little while. And our third is to provide recommendations, policy recommendations, and best practices for the Buffalo Police in order to address a lot of the concerns that were raised over the past month or so by the community members that we had the chance to engage with. The formation of the board came about when a couple of organizations here in the city of Buffalo, Open Buffalo and Partnership for the Public Good, having attended a few of the Police Advisory Committee meetings, Police Oversight Committee meetings that are, of whom Councilman David Rivera is a steward over. Mm-hmm. We had the chance to attend those meetings and recognizing that folks, though that was a space for residents to be able to come forward and be able to speak about the things that were concerning to them, those meetings occurred a couple times a year.
Right.
And I know that Councilman Rivera was intent on creating a space for folks to be able to come forward. It's just that, and one of the things that we found was in the interim, like between, like the in-between,
Right.
you know? So folks were able to come forward, but something could have happened 3 or 4 months ago, and they just, at that moment, had the chance to bring it forward.
Yeah.
So we kind of thought and brainstormed and thought, what if we provide a space where folks who are already authentically engaged with our communities and who are justice minded are able to come together to provide a space where folks who are dealing with issues around policing are able to come forward and have their voices heard and allow us to help to do some of that in-between work, so that when Councilman Rivera did convene the Police Oversight Committee meetings, we had the chance to not only present and represent the community, but be able to provide recommendations that the Police Oversight Committee could then co-sign,
Yeah.
you know, with the Buffalo Police. So that's...
Yeah, and I know recently you did make some recommendations about body cameras, very hot issue right now.
Yes.
Erin, can you tell us a little bit about what the advisory board recommended when it comes to police body cameras?
Sure. So we have 5 key recommendations that we're hoping the Buffalo Police Department will take into account prior to implementation of the policy. So we're hoping that they take these into account in revising their draft policy. So the first is that we feel the public should be given a meaningful opportunity to comment on the draft policy.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that we feel that the language should limit the discretion of officers to turn off the body cameras, so not be too narrow or too vague. The third is that we believe there should be opportunity for the public to view footage, in particular in circumstances of potential police misconduct or use of force. The fourth is we believe the policy should expressly address facial recognition because of its controversial nature. The policy currently does not address it at all.
Tell me a little bit about that one, Erin. What does facial recognition mean in this context?
Sure. So the vendor, one of the 2 vendors that were used to pilot the policy has expressly stated that they're going to be experimenting with the use of facial recognition. So that means that I guess really basically I think that the technology will attempt to, for investigatory purposes, use body camera footage to identify a suspect. So the problem with the biggest problem with that is that there are a lot of errors, and it's particularly dangerous in relation to race-based or race-biased policing.
Okay,
yeah.
so some cautions around facial recognition technology.
Yes.
And were
The
there?
fifth,
Yes.
yes. So the fifth is that we believe that the policy should limit where and how long the footage is stored.
So tell us about that. Why
Yeah.
is that important?
So apparently most departments, best practices in most departments, police departments that have been implementing body cam policies nationwide, note use of cloud servers, which means there's a third-party vendor that operates the server. So we believe that the policy should directly address how that third-party vendor is able to use the data that's stored. And we believe the policy should address rules to ensure proper chain of custody of the footage as related to that.
Yeah.
So.
Stephen, let me turn to you and ask you sort of what got you into this work. And I know that you were very active in pretty successful campaign to get the Buffalo Police to adopt the language access policy. So maybe if you can shed some light on kind of that issue and sort of how you came to be involved in the Police Advisory Board.
Yeah, that's what is very important point for us, especially refugee and immigrant population in the city of Buffalo. So we've been doing with, it's very involved with many different group or language access plan, group committee for that, including the PPG in this county, city, and other police department too. Yeah, we did, and we've been down with language ID card for the police department. So we still need to improvement for the police department too. So because we need accountable and also with responsibility for the both party, including with the police officer for that. So that's what we're looking for the culture competency training, because this is a big gap between those people in the law enforcement department too.
So you're looking for cultural competency training for the
cultural
police.
competency training for the police, and also the language use, interpretation use for those things.
Yeah.
So sometimes they use it with our minor child. So that's not our officer to use it for that. So that's what we need to look at, is more accountable for the police officer. And
Sometimes
also
they're using children to interpret for family members.
that's what we hear that in the experience in the community. I mean, the community, different community in the city.
Right. But
very-
they have a service where they can call up a language line and get live interpretation over the telephone, so they don't need to be relying on family members and kids, right?
Yes, that's why we need to getting more information to the police officer, because they must be aware of that, and they must know that what is available result for those service for them. So
Right.
that's what we need to do. Both educate to them, the police officer and the community member too. That's why
Right.
I was involved and stay involved with highlighting for those things.
Important for community members
Yes.
who do need the language services to know that they're entitled to it and that they can get it
That's
if
correct.
the police aren't offering it up.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct.
wonderful. So Danny, maybe you can tell us a little bit. You've done 3 community forums so far. Let's hear what some of the top issues that people had on their mind at those forums were.
Sure. So the number one most mentioned concern was about authentic community policing. And the community members that we had the chance to engage with were very clear about the fact that they wanted community officers who would come into their communities to build authentic relationships with them, to really learn about who they are, and engage with them on a human level, and not just for the sake of getting intel and getting information. And several, especially at the first forum, there were several attendees who 20, 30 years ago remembered the community officer, specifically who was actually in attendance, Ted Kirkland, a community officer who
Long-time WUFO radio host, among other things. Shout out to Ted.
Yes, he was lifted up many times, several times actually, while we were there, because he was an officer who the community felt really cared about them on an authentic level, on a human level. And he was the person who walked the beat, who walked up and down the street, who asked about their kids and their well-being without any other motive behind it. And that's what they feel is most important in order to continue building relationships with the community.
So let's talk a little bit about community policing. So the Buffalo Police Force has 11 officers who that's their whole job, is community policing. And I think everyone is happy that they exist, but the discussion is really more about all the other officers and how they can change their mode of policing and so that it incorporates more community policing. So I don't know if any of you could talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like on a day-to-day level. What would the police officers do differently if they were doing more community policing as part of their day-to-day work?
Well, one thing specifically, they mentioned they want officers to actually get out of their cars and walk, or ride a bike, and they want for them to not. They were very clear about intention, and I think community members, especially folks who have been, who felt occupied and who have felt surveilled by the police. They can tell when someone, whether it be an officer or anybody, is engaging with them for the purpose of trying to ascertain something, to get something, or simply to understand who they are, and they want for the police to be authentically concerned with their well-being. And they also really called for officers to call out other officers who were engaging in activities and behavior that is problematic. They feel that officers who are protected in so many ways should be willing to use their power and be willing to stand up and speak out against other officers who are doing things that are problematic and harmful to their communities, even if it might be, it might cost them something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like community, really all they have is their voices, and officers have a lot of protection behind them.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Aaron or Stephen, any other themes from the community forums that you want to share?
Yes, they share that. They express that, it's not share.
Mm-hmm.
So they express that they would like to see more diversity in the police officer.
Mm-hmm.
So including the immigrant population, refugee population involved with law enforcement. And I would like to go back with training the cultural competency for the police officer.
Mm-hmm.
It is a way be great if they are they have the policy to providing the cultural competency training in the police law enforcement training academy, because study with a new police officer. Then after they graduate the school, then they had to go with different districts, different police station. So that's what they are aware, and they will be more better service for the community service. We did that before. We have been going to law enforcement training academy and giving presentation, what is background, culture, everything for that. That's will be great. And also I spoke with some police officer. Then that we had to going around on the street. We've been down before too. We go house to house on the street, greedy and providing information what sensitivity, what happened with the emergency call or someone break, and how we had to protect that. So we've been done before, and also we're looking forward next time with them. So they agree, and we'll be very soon to do that again. I believe that.
Great.
I believe that.
Now, Aaron, you wrote the Alarming Disparities report that we released some years ago that first documented the racial disparities in criminal justice enforcement here in Erie County. And I know that you've also been looking at the role of implicit bias and studying that in your role as a professor of social work. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about sort of what implicit bias means and what role it has in policing and creating the kind of racial disparities that we see in this region.
Sure. So what we've come societally to understand is that we as people unconsciously act on biases that we have that we may not be aware of, and that impacts our behaviors in interpersonal interactions, it impacts our behaviors in terms of the policies we create. And so in terms of policing, connected with cultural competency is the importance of implicit bias training for officers who are constantly faced, whether it's community policing or crisis intervention, with interpersonal interactions between officers and residents of communities. And then additionally, again, on a policy level, that training impacts awareness of important factors to take into consideration in the creation of policy and procedure on a regular basis.
Yeah, I always feel like it's important to note that everyone has implicit biases, so it's not something that's limited to police officers. It's just particularly important in policing because they're making life or death decisions in a split-second manner often, and so their subconscious decision-making, the importance of it is just elevated, but it's important in all areas of society as well, and something every institution needs to work on, certainly not just police. Danny, what else did you hear from community members as far as their top concerns about policing?
So the second most frequently mentioned concern was racism and white supremacy within the Buffalo Police Department. There were several instances where folks of color, especially young black men, were unfortunately treated very badly by officers. And the folks who actually witnessed and witnessed these things happening were actually at the forums. And they described like the instantaneous trauma that was created as a result of it. You know? And it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. I think it directly relates to the implicit bias training and the cultural competence that the need for cultural competence training that Stephen and Aaron spoke about. it's problematic. And the thing is, there's like along with that white supremacy and the racism within the Buffalo Police Department, that is where a lot of folks feel unsafe. They feel unsafe because if folks are going to be treated and police are going to respond to them in this way, it's like, what chance do they have? You know, they did recognize that Commissioner Byron Lockwood has been, intentional about attending different community events and has really been. They appreciate the effort that he's putting forward. It's just unfortunate that the police, the force is just not one person, you know? So the folks who are putting in effort, unfortunately, can't make up for the behavior that is problematic.
Yes.
You know?
So how do you go about building a culture and putting in the accountability mechanisms that are needed to make improvements? Do you think, what are some of the steps or tools that the city needs to use in order to make the change that you want to see?
Well,
that's why we need a policy. Policy for the all police officers. And the same, all police officers must be attended or getting credit for them. So it is training. It's a new officer and the old former officer doesn't matter because everything is changing. Sometimes they transfer different station to different station. So that's why important to get it. The police department had that. This is right policy has to be followed. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and Erin, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I'd just like to note that I think in relation to whether it's de-escalation training, implicit bias, or cultural competency training, none of these are things that can be one-time trainings, either at the start or in the middle. They have to be ongoing, and that's part of what builds a shifted culture of transparency and accountability and an interest in the community.
One thing I read when we were doing our research for the big study on policing that we released a couple of years ago was that classroom-style training of police officers only gets so far, and that what they learn, where they learn the most is when they first start as officers. They learn from the officers that they're paired with, which makes total sense, just in terms of how do you learn? You learn from seeing what someone else is doing on the spot, doing the actual job. But one of the other findings that was interesting in the research was that with bias training, sort of classroom-style training was much more powerful if it was paired with positive interactions across racial lines. So that's the importance of not just in the training setting, but in the day-to-day work of making sure that officers get a chance to have positive interactions with community members across geographic, racial, ethnic, language lines, so that they can not just surface the implicit biases, but then be able to correct them by having good interactions with people, not just doing 911 response where, of course, you're not likely to have that many good interactions with people.
And just as a follow-up to the importance of culture, there are policies on the books right now that I'm sure would absolutely protect people, but they're not being adhered to. You know? And the thing is, officers have discretion. That is why there are racial disparities between the so many folks who are arrested for marijuana possession, for for other things, yet their white counterparts are not. You know, the policies are absolutely designed to be universal. However, once an officer has a person in their custody, they then have the discretion as to how they move forward from there. And that's where that culture change is so critically important. And I know that one of the campaigns specifically that I know PPG and Open Buffalo is working on in terms of trying to prevent folks from being indoctrinated into the system is like the LEAD program. And I know that there's I think the project manager from Albany described the importance of champions within the police department, being willing to take the messages that we give and really being an advocate for them.
Yeah, so you mentioned the LEAD program. Do you want to explain to folks what that is?
Sure. So LEAD is Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, and that is a program where folks, essentially folks who are more of a threat to themselves than anyone else, are given the opportunity to be paired with a project manager are referred to services, healthcare providers and services in the city of Buffalo, as opposed to being arrested. So an officer, instead of arresting a person for issues that might relate to addiction, poverty, mental health issues, right? Instead of them being arrested, they are referred to someone who is able to help them to address those concerns, as opposed to criminalizing them.
Yeah.
Because, and especially for folks who are more of a threat to themselves than anyone else, criminalizing them and putting them into the system is not going to help anything. All it's going to do is exacerbate the things that they're trying to do. And I always visualize a person dealing with those issues as someone just trying to make their way home. You know, someone who's disoriented, someone who might be hurting and struggling, but who is just trying to find their way.
Yeah. And the good news with law enforcement assisted diversion, or LEAD, is that it's already been used in Seattle and Albany and some other places very successfully, and that police officers tend to like it a lot once they get the chance to use it, because it does give them the discretion where they see that the problem's not really going to be solved with an arrest, to do something else, to take people directly to services that are going to get at that underlying problem. So exciting to see that there's progress in bringing LEAD to Buffalo. What else, Danny, did you hear from the people in terms of their top priorities or top concerns? Go ahead, Stephen. Thanks.
I just get here as good news for the related with training for the police officer. It is a crisis intervention, how to treat it for the mental health people and sensitive people for that. It is it's a big grant for them. I hear that it's 1.65 million for 5-year grant. It is for the Erie County and the 50 location, 1550 local law enforcement. So that will be included Buffalo Police Department too. I believe that they will be studying more training for the police officer. That's very
to work with crisis intervention teams in dealing with mental health.
Yes, mental health and substance abuse people.
Great.
So that's why they will be decreasing less in understanding how they have to be treated for those people. That's why the criminal case will be go down for them.
Right.
So that's very good news to hear that.
Excellent. Some good news. Always good to hear good news. Yeah. Go ahead, Danny. You were.
And related to like crisis intervention services, another concern is like mental health concerns that folks are having in the community. That was something that was brought forward. There was a woman who attended our third forum who described what her son had gone through in the Erie County Holding Center. And she said, unfortunately, her son was dealing with very similar issues that India Cummings was, which is why that case was so dear to her heart and why it touched her so deeply, because folks were dealing with issues of mental health issues or issues related to any form of substance. I wouldn't call it abuse, but any kind of like substance issues. Those are the folks who, unfortunately, especially folks of color, when they might be acting erratically, officers may not know exactly like how to approach them, what to do, and that's where the like all of the trainings that we've been speaking about and culture change is so critically important, because trust is imperative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for police officers, it's one of their biggest frustrations is that they've become mental health first responders because we haven't done a good enough job with mental health services, and so that people end up dealing with the police when that's not what they need. Well, we are running out of time. I want to thank our 3 guests from the Police Advisory Board. We've had Danny Johnson, Aaron Carmen, and Stephen Sanyu, all members of Buffalo's Police Advisory Board. Be sure to look out for future events from them and chances to continue this dialogue with the community, and they will continue to do advocacy with the City of Buffalo to improve policing. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it. Be sure to tune in to The Public Good every Tuesday at 1 p.m. on Facebook Live and every Tuesday at 7 p.m. here on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 AM. Thanks.